of the post-cabinet briefing.
As a result of the elections from 2013, and they carried out a number of acts that are completely contrary to the existing legislation in the form of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, which is a very specific piece of legislation that gives a lot of autonomy to the Tobago House of Assembly to run the affairs in Tobago. So what the former administration had done is they set up a ministry called the Ministry of Tobago Development, and they were trying to do things in parallel and suppress the THA. And what they did is they set up a specific state enterprise called the Human Capital Development Facilitation Company Limited to carry out their plan to suppress the THA. As had been said by this administration, we would not support in any way any degradation away from any piece of legislation, and in particular the THA Act, and we would not permit any duplication of the functions, the statutory functions, powers, and autonomy of the Tobago House of Assembly. So immediately upon coming into office, what we did is we mandated that a review be conducted into this former Ministry of Tobago Development and the Human Capital Company that I've referred to, and we asked that a report been done. And we're here today to announce that that report was completed. It was done by a two-person team, Dr. Prince, as well as Mrs. Ethel Hector Berkeley. And what we found is that the findings of the report, which are now committed in black and white, have us very, very concerned. And we saw it fit to tell the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago some of the disturbing facts found that are now committed to this report, which is a review of projects and programs of the former Ministry of Tobago Development and the Human Capital Development Facilitation Company. And the report is dated February 2016. We were in the process of reviewing the report because a number of decisions then had to be taken coming out of the disturbing findings of this report, some of which I'd like to now share with you and the wider population of Trinidad and Tobago. The executive summary says that over the shelf life of the former Ministry of Tobago Development, the ministry attempted to implement some 11 major projects and programs. A review of these projects and programs found that most of the projects and programs, 1, fell short in attaining projected outcomes, 2, were ill-conceived and safe and except for unrealized political capital of the former Member of Parliament for Tobago West and former Minister of Tobago Development, Dr. Delman Baker, had negligible actual or potential social economic benefits to the people of Tobago. 3, there was evidence of poor financial management. And 4, it duplicated the responsibilities of the Tobago House of Assembly, and in particular, their legal responsibilities and duties. The review of the projects and programs included recommendations for the discontinuance of 7 and the transfer of 4 for consideration by the THA for completion. An analysis of the financial information reveals that one of the largest expenditure items of this former Ministry of Tobago Development was contract employment, where approximately 194 contract positions were created and filled over the 5-year period. Analysis of the recruitment and selection process undertaken under this line item presented considerable challenges consequent upon the absence of or reluctance of the ministry to provide official, reliable information on the recruitment procedure. Nevertheless, the unearthed, undocumented information suggests that recruitment and selection of contract employees invariably involve newspaper advertisements of no more than 3 days, and this is an important point now, followed by selection at the discretion of either the former Minister of Tobago Development, Dr. Baker, or the former Permanent Secretary, Dr. Boris. It goes on to say, in consequence, the team, that's the two-man team, strongly recommends that the former accounting officer of the former Ministry of Tobago Development, Dr. Boris, and the former Minister, Dr. Baker, be required to account for expenditure undertaken without the requisite approvals. The team audited some 602 asset items of the Ministry and the Human Capital Development Facilitation Company by item description, location, type, status, assigned staff, brand and model serial number. They uploaded the assets on an electronic software for ease of future updating of the asset register. Another disturbing finding is as follows. The exercise revealed that the ministry asset base includes some 13 refrigerators, 13 television sets, a substantial number of unused computers, a fully outfitted gymnasium, and this part, and facilities for a valet employed to superintend the sartorial image of the former Minister of Tobago Development, Dr. Baker. So they had built a valet for the sartorial image and to improve the image of Dr. Baker. The Office of the Prime Minister and the Central Administrative Services Tobago will now be rationalized to exclude functions scheduled to be delivered by THA at law and only include functions which the central government has a legal mandate to provide in Tobago or are necessary to be provided by the central government. This company, the Human Capital Development Facilitation Company, which was established by the former administration, appears to be no more than an expensive financial conduit surreptitiously intended to spend money on programs intent on supporting the fledgling political capital of the former Minister of Tobago Development, Dr. Delman Baker. There is therefore now a cogent cause for winding up the company, terminating all employees on contract within the meaning of the law, and disposing of all of the company's assets. Just to highlight a few salient points, a summary of the findings from review of the projects, and this is the NGO support services. It was found that Cabinet approved funding for the then Minister Baker to provide discretionary funding to NGOs, FBOs, and CBOs for the provision of safety net for poor and vulnerable and to create infrastructure to support lifelong learning skills and buildings to the residents of Bethel, which coincidentally is a village of Dr. Baker, through some 46 identified NGOs and CBOs. Over the period June 2010 to September 2015, the Ministry of Tobago Development engaged some 194 contract employees, as I said before. What was found is a number of these contract employees were recruited in positions for which they have neither the requisite qualifications nor experience. The recruitment process was mainly at the discretion of the minister and the permanent secretary. And of the 194 contract employees, some 168 of them had their contracts terminated by January 2016. The amount of money spent on this was over $16.1 million. So as a result of the findings of this review and the report, Cabinet has today taken a decision that the Human Capital Development Facilitation Company Limited will be wound up in accordance with the relevant law as a matter of urgent priority, and that this winding up would be undertaken by the corporation sole. The staff who are on the permanent establishment of the former Ministry of Tobago Development, who are public officers, will be redeployed to the wider public service. The Office of the Prime Minister, through the Central Administration Services Tobago Division, will refrain from engaging in any project whatsoever that duplicates any function of the Tobago House of Assembly or which is in contravention of the THA Act. The surplus assets of the former ministry will be transferred to other government agencies, and this report is now going to be forwarded to the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs for us to determine whether there have been any breaches of fiduciary duty, any criminal actions that require criminal sanction, and any other further civil actions that may be taken against those who may have breached the law. The short point is that this administration is not going to support any duplication of efforts by the Tobago House of Assembly, a body that was given the authority by law since the 80s to have autonomy over the affairs of Tobago with the support of the central government of Trinidad and Tobago. And we believe this was a direct, what I've just read to you, with the use of the former Ministry of Tobago Development and this company in particular, would direct efforts by the former administration to undermine the Tobago House of Assembly after there was a resounding victory at the polls in 2013, which the population would remember was 12-0. This is not going to be further encouraged. We've shut it down and we're moving to take the necessary restorative action. We've already begun the improvement of relations, and what's going to happen now is a proper investigation through the Office of the Attorney General to see whether there's any criminal or civil actions that can and should take place. Thank you very much. That is what we wanted to tell the population of one of the matters that was considered today by Cabinet. At this stage, I'll welcome a couple questions from the media.
Minister, can you specify what the projects are that have been discontinued and which ones will be transferred to the THA? And can you just also clarify what the establishment date was for the Human Capital Development Company?
The projects, we're in the process of looking at that and determining exactly which projects, along with THA, working with THA to find out what projects they think would be the right ones to be completed and continued until completion in Tobago. So that process is undergoing. With respect to the second question you're asking me about the company, what were you asking me about the company?
The exact date of its creation.
I don't have the exact date of its creation. What I'm seeing here is it seems that it was created sometime, well, the ministry was established in June 2010, and I don't have the exact information as to when this entity was established, but I'm seeing a suggestion that it was after the general election, the THA elections in 2013.
If there's still a decision to be made about which projects are discontinued, which are going to be transferred, how are you able to say that 7 were discontinued and 4 will be transferred?
Correct. Well, the 7, but I don't have the information as to the specifics. Those were the recommendations made by the report. They are recommending, this is a two-panel report, two-panel investigative team. They have recommended that 7 be discontinued and that 4 be continued. But before those decisions are taken, obviously there needs to be consultation with the THA as to whether they agree with those suggestions.
So just continuing along that vein, could you give us an idea perhaps as to the number of employees at this particular company who will be affected by the winding up? Perhaps a time frame for when the wind up will take place and the monetary value of the assets in question?
The number of employees, again, there's a disaggregation of those who are permanent, so the permanent employees who can be redeployed in the public service. The contract workers are the ones who are being looked at, and there is going to be a retrenchment termination process to deal with that. But there is also the consideration, the fact that it's being wound up. What are the legal effects of the winding up with respect to retrenchment, termination, severance, etc.?
Is there anything in the findings which suggests any? I know you said that you'll have to liaise with the DHA, you'll have to look at possible breaches, civil and otherwise, but is there anything in the findings so far which suggests possible breach by the former minister himself or the permanent secretary?
I have not seen the source documentation. It will be the source documentation that would bear those facts out. But the fact is we've had highlighted in the report suggestions that certain procurement processes may not have been followed. The award of contracts of employment seem to have been at the discretion of the minister and the permanent secretary. Again, I am just going on the basis of the findings of the report. But as you would recognize, to go any further, one would have to look at the source documentation supporting those findings.
If I could just switch the topic for a minute. As you are probably aware by now, the opposition has signaled an intent to challenge the SSA legislation once it's proclaimed. Now the argument seems to be that the Attorney General did not advance an argument suggesting why the bill did not require a special majority. So is the government concerned about this pending litigation, and is it capable of showing clearly that this is not the case as the opposition contends?
This government is not concerned about any attempts to frustrate the legislation by the opposition. If they want to go to court, they're free to go to court. The court will ultimately decide. They are not correct because arguments were advanced by the Attorney General, both in the upper and lower house, as to why this simple amendment, I've said this here before a few weeks ago, the amendments that were made to the SSA Act were simple amendments. There were 5 clauses, and all it was the broadening of the definition, the introduction of a broad definition of serious crimes. Our position is that that does not require any special majority for passage. A lot of confusion was created by the opposition with respect to this bill. We are glad this has been assented to now, as it had to be assented was our position. We will now move towards proclamation, because this plays a very important part in the role of fighting crime by the law enforcement agencies.
One other thing I wanted to ask at this point is whether there was any discussion at Cabinet today regarding the time frame for moving ahead with amendments to the issue of child marriages and legislation affecting that. Seeing that there seems to be consensus for raising the age limit to 18.
The Attorney General spent quite a few hours yesterday, I believe about 3 hours yesterday, dealing with this issue. And he is moving the legislation, which has to go through a process before it comes to Cabinet. But we are aware as a government of the general consensus with respect to the age with relation to child marriages. And I know that the Attorney General has been moving with the draftspeople of legislation to have this done as expeditiously as possible. But it was not before the Cabinet today.
Minister, I've noticed you talked about the former Minister, Mr. Baker, and the permanent secretary. Wasn't there a board of directors on this?
There should have been a board of directors. I have just been looking at the report that was presented, and it seems that one of the breaches that concerned the persons who compiled this report after doing an investigation would have been, because they seem to have focused on the minister and the permanent secretary. So you're 100% correct. There seems to be some suggestion of maybe the silence of the board, or maybe the condonance of the board with respect to what was done. Again, I think these are the reasons why it's been now sent to the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs for a more in-depth investigation to be done, because there is no reference in the report to the board or the executives of the company.
Which ministry is this company currently under at this point?
I suspect it will be under the section of the Office of the Prime Minister, the CAST section, that deals with Tobago.
Okay, because it seems as though there hasn't been a lot of information, based on what you were saying. The government is still in the dark with respect to a lot of things with this company. So
correct. What the government had done is appoint a 2-man team to go and do a review of it and to produce a report. The authors of the report have indicated very clearly that they had difficulty in obtaining documentation from the ministries. I can tell you from some of the other work that has been done and some of the other stuff I've been involved in, unfortunately, this seems to have happened, that certain documentation that should reside in ministries have not been forthcoming or can't be found, etc. This seems to be another instance of it. But until we now from our ministry start to take a deeper, more insightful look into it, I don't know what the position is with respect to the source documentation.
Is Mr. Boris still within the public service?
Again, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question.
Mr. Minister, could you indicate again, as you have, that not for the first time that we are hearing alleged mischief in public office, and you have indicated that quite apart from the findings that have emerged from that report, that you still have to review the entire report, so to speak, to arrive at the conclusion that something is amiss?
No, I think from reading the content of the report, they have red flagged a number of items that indicate something is amiss. What I'm saying now, there has to be a deeper dive investigation into what exactly took place, including obtaining source documentation, statements, and other types of work that take place with a proper investigation. This was a review with recommendations that have red flagged a number of areas that led to Cabinet taking decisions this morning, which are to wind the company up, transfer the assets out, redeploy the public servants who are permanent public servants to other areas of the public service, and to take the action to deal with the immediate with respect to our forensic analysis or investigation into what took place in the past. That is what will commence now.
Mr. Minister, you are on record as indicating that the Strategic Services Agency, yes,
The SSA.
the SSA, would have, would have had a position with respect to the arrest of the guy with the bomb issue. And since then, we have heard that this may not have been the case since the bill has not been proclaimed.
Okay, first of all, I cannot be on record as having said that because I never said that. Unfortunately, I think it got somewhere there was misinformation passed, but what I had stated at the time, and I continue to maintain, is the person who was held with the phone call having come from his phone, the phone call that called in a threat to Trinity Mall, that person was held as a result of the intelligence gathering of the law enforcement agencies. And when I went on further to say the intelligence gathering arms of law enforcement agencies would continue to do their work to alleviate any concerns that they may not have been doing their work, including the SSA. So what I had said is the intelligence service apparatus of Trinidad and Tobago includes the work done by the SSA. So that's the first point. And the work being done by the SSA I did not factor that into that specific incident.
Just two more questions briefly. Mr. Minister, given the adverse weather conditions and the forecast for adverse season, and you have a recent claim by the ODPM that they have a shortfall in funding and also in amenities to meet demands from the public, what is there on the table that government would have to ensure that we can weather the storm, so to speak?
Again, the government and the public, the population at large, needs to be aware that we're in some difficult economic circumstances and times. But certainly the government, in prioritizing where the available funds should go, are always aware that their competing needs. If the ODPM comes forward and says, with supporting evidence, that there are needs for increasing purchases of items, etc., as a responsible government, that is something we will put our priorities on and we will focus on. We're not going to let the population of Trinidad and Tobago be caught flat-footed and not prepared to weather any type of storm. As a government, one of our responsibilities is to prioritize the expenditure of money, and we will continue to do so to the best of our ability and in a responsible manner.
Minister, in that vein of prioritizing limited funding, there's been a lot of kickback against government deciding to invest in the so-called seas cruise. Can you, at this point, rationalize why we've pumped $500,000 into a private venture?
It was, my understanding is it was $450,000 split between two ministries. One is the Ministry of Tourism, which has a very different mandate to the Ministry of Culture and Community Development. So those are the two ministries, first of all. Both invested 225,000 TT dollars into a venture that when they did their assessment, they thought it would bring significant returns to Trinidad and Tobago. My understanding is that it is a cruise that has been chartered to go from Miami to the Bahamas. But a number of our top entertainers, our fashion designers, and other persons of culture in Trinidad and Tobago are participating in this cruise. So it was some measure of us assisting them in offsetting the cost of having it, because there was a thought pattern that it would bring returns to Trinidad and Tobago by getting our image of Trinidad and Tobago out there to a wider market and audience, and also to support culture, because of course the Ministry of Culture has to support our cultural icons within reason and to take reasonable decisions, etc. So it was felt by that ministry that the investment of $225,000 would bring returns by investing in culture on this instance.
Concretize what those returns would be, other than that sort of vague broad brush of expand our image?
I mean, I think the truth is in these types of instances, I mean, for example, let me bring it back into context. When we came into office, what we had found with one of the major shows for Carnival is that about approximately $18 million had been pumped into that in the past, be it in prize money, sponsorship, etc., etc. And the question becomes, well, is that bringing value for money? So what I would expect is that each ministry in this instance did an evaluation, and they came to the conclusion that $225,000 from their budget would make sense in going out there. So if you're asking me, do I have figures and can I calculate the rate of return, the return on investment, etc., I don't have those figures available. And I think in these instances, what you're really doing, because we are looking to diversify our economy, part of that would be to draw investment into Trinidad and Tobago, to draw more tourism into Trinidad and Tobago. It was felt that these were platforms that could assist in that exercise.
Just to go back to the substantive issue, in mentioning that there may be breaches of fiduciary duty that you all can pick up on the former minister and the PS on, what updates, if any, do you have on other similar instances that we've heard over the last couple of months from the Ministry of the Attorney General, where there could be some kind of action brought against a number of people?
As we've been very, very careful to say throughout, I certainly have been extremely careful on that note, we are not the ones ultimately, apart from civil action, who are in charge of criminal investigations and criminal prosecutions. Our government is there to facilitate the law enforcement agencies and to provide resources to the government agencies. And if we find evidence of wrongdoing, to provide that evidence to law enforcement and to the prosecuting arm of the state, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. That exercise is continuing, it is ongoing, and ultimately it's the law enforcement agencies as well as the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution who will take decisions as to whether anything they've been provided for cross the hurdle to lay criminal charges for.
Not though, like, give specifics on what particular matters you all have turned over evidence to.
I would prefer not to do that because, of course, in criminal investigations and successful criminal prosecution, my modus operandi is say nothing and eventually let the law enforcement arms as well as the Office of the DPP do their job properly.
Mr. Minister, relationships between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago remain very much on the front burner. The latest position we would have gathered is that there has been an increase in the number of arrivals at the port in Cedros. And the Cedros residents have been known to have been complaining about, the weight of support services and that kind of thing. What are there, in train? What is there in train for to treat with this issue?
I can tell you that took up some of our time this morning in our cabinet deliberations and discussions, exactly the point you've raised there. The Minister of National Security, the Minister of Health and other arms of government are monitoring the situation very carefully, and as time passes, if there's a need for increased resources in Cedros, Icarcus and some of the other ports, it is something we're aware of and we're preparing for, and those respective ministers as well as others have their eye on the ball and intend to, at the appropriate time, increase the number of resources necessary in those particular areas. Whilst you've brought up the issue of Venezuela, it gives me the opportunity as well to report to Trinidad and Tobago that since the visit of the President of Venezuela, President Maduro, last Monday, the Minister of National Security has attended in Venezuela, Caracas, this week, on Monday of this week, to carry out conversations with his equivalents in Venezuela. They did have very, very good discussions about the issues of border patrol, amongst other issues, and how we can work together to ensure that we're dealing with national security issues. Yesterday morning, the Minister of Trade led a Trinidad and Tobago delegation. I participated for an hour and a half or so with her counterparts. So we are moving forward with our local manufacturers to take it beyond the exploration of products. The Venezuelans have identified some of the products they want. We are now having conversations with our local manufacturers as to whether it is that we can provide this without any adverse effects on Trinidad and Tobago, because of course our first line and our first priority are the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, so that's something we're aware of, as well as energy. Yesterday afternoon, an energy delegation came across. I met with a delegation from the Ministry of Energy to continue the discussions, and we're moving towards the further signing of agreements with respect to the Dragon Field, and that is tremendous for the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. So we are moving as quickly as is possible, along with our Venezuelan counterparts, to make these things a reality and move from just talk and discussion to action on the ground and action in the seas when it comes to Dragon.
And the last question from me, Minister. With the appointment to the Public Transport Service Corporation Board, what is there else that can have the public confidence in the improved or enhanced service, given the fact that there has been willy-nilly increase in maxi and taxi fares, and therefore there may be increased demand for use of the service?
This is something that the Minister of Transport would be in a better position to deal with. He would have the specifics, but it is something that government is aware of and that government has mandated that we look into, which is improving the efficiency of the public transport system in Trinidad and Tobago. The maxi taxi service and the taxi services also play a very important role in that. But what we're looking to do, and I know the Minister of Transport is working on it, is increase the efficiency of those assets that are under the control of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, a la PTSC.
Good afternoon, Minister. Has there been any update concerning the payment of back pay to the protective services? There was a deadline that 50% of cash was supposed to be paid by June 30th.
Today is June 2nd. The Minister of Finance, I'm sure, will address that long before June 30th. But he is aware of the deadline, and I know the Ministry of Finance has been working towards keeping that commitment. I'll take two more questions. Thanks.
This will be my last, Minister. Now, you talked a lot about Venezuela and moving quickly on several fronts, but how quickly are we moving on the repatriation issue? Because is it that the repatriation of our nationals is somehow contingent upon the repatriation of the Venezuelan nationals in our detention centers? So what you're talking about moving quickly on quite a few areas: security, trade, energy, and so on. But that is also another area which was part of the bilateral. So where are we exactly with that and getting our nationals?
The Minister of National Security did address that upon his return to Trinidad and Tobago. And I think he's made it very clear that with respect to the Trinidadians, there is a judicial and due process that must take place in Venezuela that we are not interfering with. So the authorities in Venezuela, we've asked them to move as expeditiously as possible with respect to their due process and their judicial system to deal with our nationals of Trinidad and Tobago who are detained in Venezuela. There is no correlation between the two. So we have told the Venezuelan government that we are prepared to repatriate their nationals who are held in our detention center, which is really an immigration issue. And there is no connection between the two. So we're ready to do that. I suspect the conversation is also taking place to have that done as expeditiously as possible. Last question, Ria.
This is a facetious question.
Once you've admitted it in front.
You said the capital assets were going to be transferred to other ministries. Does that include the valet to superintend the secretarial image?
I would hope that proper decisions are made with respect to that equipment, and that in part of the transfer out of assets, it would be other ministries using the assets that are useful to the particular ministries. If there's surplus, as I suspect there is, and I suspect you're focused on one of the more predominant areas of surplus, that it should be properly disposed of in accordance with the legislation. So have your public auction and get rid of it, because I don't think any minister in this administration wants a valet for the sartorial image. Thank you very much, members of the media. I appreciate it. Have a great day. Take care.